Tonight, Russia is welcoming President Trump's new U.S. national security strategy, calling it largely consistent with Moscow's, quote, vision. Russia is no longer labeled as a threat to the United States. CBS's Lee Canary at our London bureau reports this latest move has set off alarm bells among allies, including Ukraine.
For 3 days, American and Ukrainian officials in Florida talked about conditions for peace, but the deal is not done. And at the same time, Russia sent a message straight to Ukraine, and it was far from peaceful. Russia launched over 600 drones this weekend and dozens of missiles, killing at least 4 people. One of the targets, a railway hub that Ukraine's leaders said had no military value. A warehouse went up in flames after an airstrike. Ruslan Malashok lives next door. This is not for peace, he said. This is for the destruction of Ukrainians.
So here's what just happened. And honestly, this is the kind of thing that makes you wonder if anyone in Washington is actually paying attention to what's going on anymore. Trump just rolled out his big shiny new national security strategy. This thing was supposed to be his master plan, his way of telling the world that America's back, that we're taking control, that we're not going to be pushed around anymore by anyone. Big tough talk, right? Totally going to reset how we deal with everyone, from China to Russia to every other country that's been testing our patience for years. This was the moment where Trump was supposed to show everyone that America means business and we're not playing around.
But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Zelensky spent Saturday paying tribute to the armed forces, looking into the eyes of family members of soldiers who died defending their country, while the land they fought for is on the negotiating table. Territorial concessions, including large areas currently occupied by Russia, are part of the U.S. proposed peace plan. Tomorrow, President Zelensky will be here in London, meeting with leaders from the UK, France, and Germany, discussing the plan and, most importantly for this region, Jerika, security guarantees that protect Ukraine from Russian attacks in the future.
But then something absolutely wild went down, something that literally nobody saw coming in this particular way. The Kremlin, like Putin's actual spokespeople, the people who speak directly for the Russian government, they came out and basically said, yeah, we love this. This is great for us. Are you kidding me? This is the kind of moment where you gotta stop and ask yourself a really hard question. How did Trump's big tough strategy to show American strength somehow end up looking like a gift to Putin? How does that even happen? How do you accidentally hand your main adversary exactly what he wants? This is wild. Here's what Dmitry Peskov said. This is Putin's spokesman. This is basically Putin's mouthpiece talking directly to the entire world. He called Trump's strategy largely in line with Russia's views. That's not a compliment veiled in diplomatic language. That's Russia, straight up saying, yeah, this document makes us happy. We like what we're reading here in this thing. We approve of it. And it gets worse from there. Peskov actually called it a radical departure from what previous administrations were doing. You know what that means? It means the Kremlin thinks Trump's new strategy is fundamentally different from everything else America's been doing before, and they're celebrating it. They're publicly celebrating an American national security strategy because they think it helps Russia's interests. Think about that for a second. Really think about it hard. When Putin's people are celebrating your national security strategy, something has gone seriously wrong with your approach. This isn't supposed to happen. This is not how foreign policy is supposed to work. Your adversaries aren't supposed to be cheering your moves. They're not supposed to be happy with your plans. That's not strength. That's the opposite of strength. That's weakness. And yet here we are watching it happen in real time on television. The whole point of Trump coming into office was to project power, right? To show that America's got a new sheriff in town, that we're done with the weak stuff, that we're going to stand up to Russia, we're going to protect our interests, we're going to make sure our allies know we've got their backs no matter what happens. Those were the talking points. Those were the messages he was selling. But now, just as he's unveiling his actual strategy document for how all that's supposed to happen, the people he's supposed to be tough with are basically saying, thanks for giving us what we want. Thanks for playing right into our hands. And look, this comes at a really specific moment in time. We're not in some quiet period where foreign policy is just background noise that nobody cares about. No. We're in the middle of the Ukraine situation getting worse by the day. Winter's coming. Russia's been on an offensive push. They've been advancing their position. Ukraine's been begging for American support. They're begging for us to keep the pressure on Russia so they can actually fight back effectively. And now Trump's rolling out a strategy that, according to Moscow itself, actually aligns with what Russia wants. The timing here is absolutely brutal. It's the worst possible timing you could imagine. What's really frustrating is that Trump ran on this idea that he'd be the guy to stand up to Putin in a way nobody else could. He talked about strength. He talked about being unpredictable. He talked about making deals, sure, but deals from a position of absolute dominance. Deals where America wins, and the other side just has to accept it because they don't have any choice. But what we're seeing here is the exact opposite of that. We're seeing a strategy that makes it sound like Trump and Putin are actually on the same page about what the world should look like. And the Kremlin didn't just kind of give it a thumbs up in a quiet way. No, they came out publicly and basically endorsed it. That's not subtle. That's not some backroom thing happening behind closed doors. That's Russia, in broad daylight, saying to the world, yeah, we're good with this Trump strategy. This aligns with how we see things. This is what we wanted. Which, come on, means there's probably stuff in there that's bad news for Ukraine, bad news for our European allies, bad news for anyone who thought Trump was going to be the hardliner on Russia that he promised to be. Look, this is one of those moments where you gotta step back and ask the bigger question. How does your adversary end up being happy with your national security strategy? That's not supposed to happen. That's basically the opposite of what you're trying to do. If I told you, hey, I've got this new plan to beat you, and you responded with, oh great, that plan is actually really good for me, then I've clearly failed at what I set out to do. I've failed completely. So what's in this strategy that's making Moscow so happy? That's the question. That's what we need to dig into right now, because this isn't just some random thing. This is the actual blueprint for how Trump's administration is going to handle national security for the next however long. This is the framework for decisions about Ukraine. It's the framework for decisions about Russia. It's the framework for decisions about American military presence in Europe. This is big stuff. This matters a lot, and if Russia's celebrating it, we need to understand why. We need to know what they're seeing that makes them think this is good for them. Okay, so let's actually get into what's going on here, because there's a lot of confusion about this whole thing floating around right now. A lot of people are going to see that Russia likes Trump's strategy and just assume he's like secretly colluding with Putin or something ridiculous like that. That's not what this is. That's too simple. That's not the real story here. But what it is arguably worse, because what it shows is a fundamental misunderstanding of how to negotiate with adversaries who want to take advantage of you. Or maybe it shows something that looks a lot like appeasement, and like, can you believe this is actually happening in real time? This is wild. Here's the thing about national security strategies. When a president puts one out, it's basically a public document that says, here's how we see the world, here's who we think are our friends, here's who we think are our enemies, and here's what we're going to do about it. It's supposed to be a signal of strength. It's supposed to tell your adversaries, don't mess with us, because here's what we're prepared to do. Here's what we're ready to do if you push us. But if your adversaries read it and go, oh, this is actually great for us, then you've completely failed at that mission. You failed at the basic thing you were trying to accomplish. So what's actually in Trump's strategy? Well, that's where it gets interesting. That's where things get complicated. According to the actual reporting that's been coming out, the strategy apparently represents a kind of fundamental rethinking of American foreign policy. Like a real departure from what we've been doing for years. And look, there's nothing inherently wrong with rethinking foreign policy. Sometimes you gotta reassess. Sometimes the old approach isn't working. Sometimes you need to take a step back and ask yourself if what you're doing actually makes sense. That's fair, that's reasonable. But when you rethink your foreign policy and your adversaries are cheering, when they're celebrating what you've come up with, you gotta ask yourself some hard questions about whether you're heading in the right direction. One of the big things here is how Trump's strategy apparently deals with Russia and Ukraine. This is super relevant because, Ukraine's still ongoing. The war's not over. We've got American money going to Ukraine. We've got weapons going there. We've got military aid flowing in. And we've got thousands of Ukrainians dying every single day in this conflict. Russia's been pushing harder and harder. They've been advancing their position on the ground. And Trump has made it pretty clear in the past that he thinks the Ukraine situation should be resolved through negotiations. Like he's talked about brokering peace deals. He's talked about getting everyone to sit down and work something out. He's talked about making a deal that everybody can live with. That's not necessarily a bad instinct. Getting to negotiations is sometimes a good thing. Sometimes that's how you end conflicts. But here's where it gets tricky. Here's where the negotiation strategy falls apart completely. When you're negotiating, you're supposed to negotiate from a position of strength. That's basic negotiation stuff. That's negotiation 101. If your adversary knows that you're desperate for a deal, they're going to ask for everything they want, and you're going to end up giving it to them because you just want the whole thing to be over. It's basic strategy. It's obvious. So if your strategy makes it sound like you're ready to negotiate with Russia, but it also sounds like you're not super committed to supporting Ukraine, then you're basically telling Putin, look, we're kinda done here. We're tired. Take what you want. Make a deal, and we'll call it good. We'll call it a victory, and move on to something else. And that's exactly what Russia's interpreting from this situation. That's exactly what they're reading into it. Peskov didn't just say they like it. He said it's largely consistent with Russia's vision of global security. Think about what that means. Russia has a vision for global security, right? That vision involves Russia being this major power that gets a say in what happens in its region. It involves weakening American influence around the world. It involves making sure that NATO doesn't get any stronger or any bigger. It involves having a free hand in places like Ukraine. It involves being able to do what Russia wants without having to worry about American interference. And Trump's strategy, according to the Kremlin, aligns with that vision. It matches up with what Russia wants the world to look like. This is the thing that really gets under your skin about the whole situation. Trump came in talking about how he was going to be tough on Russia, like he was going to make Putin respect America again. All this tough talk, right? All these promises. And then he rolls out this strategy, and it turns out that what being tough on Russia actually means is agreeing with what Russia wants. That's not being tough. That's the opposite of being tough. That's rolling over. That's giving up. And look, there's this whole history here that you gotta understand to really get what's happening. Trump, in his first term, was always kind of soft on Russia. People remember that. He was always questioning why America cared so much about Ukraine. He was always suggesting that maybe we should work with Russia instead of against them. Why are we enemies? Why can't we be friends? He even talked about pulling troops out of Europe. That was his general vibe. That was the feeling you got from him. A lot of people thought that was weird back then, and it didn't really change public opinion on him overall, but his supporters didn't care about it, so it wasn't like it mattered politically for him. It didn't hurt him. But now we're in a different situation. Now Trump's in his second term, and he's actually got the power to do something about foreign policy. He's not just talking, he's not just speculating, he's actually implementing real policies. He's making real decisions. So when he puts out a national security strategy that Russia likes, it's not just some abstract thing that exists in a document somewhere. This is going to affect real policy decisions that have real consequences. This is going to affect how much we help Ukraine. This is going to affect how we deal with Russia. This is going to affect what we do in Europe. And the fact that Russia's celebrating means they think those decisions are going to go their way. They think they're going to get what they want. One of the things that's really wild about this is the timing of it all. Trump's been president since January. We're in December now, so he's had almost a year to work on this strategy. A whole year. That's a long time. And after all that time, after all that work, after all those meetings and discussions and planning sessions, what he comes up with is something that basically aligns with what Russia wants. Were they consulting with the Kremlin? Obviously not. That would be insane. That would be treason. But somewhere along the way, whether it's because of Trump's actual beliefs about how America should interact with Russia, or because of advisors he's got around him, or just because of where his head's at on these issues, the strategy ended up in a place where Putin's basically like, yeah, we can work with this. This works for us. This is what we wanted. And here's another part that's really important to understand. This comes at a moment when Ukraine's actually losing territory. Russia's been pushing forward. The war's been going badly for Ukraine. Really badly. And if there's ever a time when Ukraine needs to know that America's got their back, that America's firmly in their corner no matter what, it's right now. It's when things are hard. It's when the situation's desperate. That's when your allies need to know you're not going to abandon them. You're not going to leave them hanging. You're going to stick with them. But when your national security strategy is something that Russia's celebrating, it kind of sends the opposite signal. It sends a message that maybe we're not as committed as we said we were. So what does this actually mean for American credibility? That's the real question. That's what matters. When we tell our allies in Europe, hey, we're going to protect you from Russia, do they believe us anymore? When we tell Ukraine, we're going to keep supporting you, we're going to keep helping you, do they trust that? Or do they look at Trump's strategy, see that Russia's happy with it, and think, oh, we're probably going to get sold out, we're probably going to get abandoned, because that's what it looks like from their perspective. That's the message it sends. This is the kind of thing that can actually have real consequences for how America's seen in the world. Our credibility is huge. Our word matters. If we say we're going to do something, people need to believe we're actually going to do it. But if we put out a strategy that our adversaries are celebrating, that our enemies are happy with, it makes it real hard for our allies to trust us. And that's not just bad in the abstract. That's not just some theoretical problem. That actually affects military decisions. That affects diplomatic decisions. That affects whether other countries want to work with us. It affects everything. Alright, so let's break this down into the actual pieces that matter, because there's a lot of noise around this story, and we need to get to what really counts. We need to focus on the things that actually matter for what comes next. First thing, Trump's strategy is being celebrated by Russia because it apparently doesn't prioritize the kind of confrontational approach that previous administrations took. Look, this is just the reality of what's happening here. The Kremlin wouldn't be publicly praising this strategy if it contained tough language about opposing Russian aggression. They wouldn't be happy if it was all about strengthening Ukraine or expanding NATO or any of that stuff. The fact that they're praising it publicly means the strategy probably doesn't emphasize those things. It probably emphasizes other stuff instead. It probably emphasizes negotiation. It probably de-emphasizes American commitments in Europe. It probably signals some willingness to accept Russian spheres of influence. Something in there is making Putin happy, and we should think about what that is. We should ask ourselves what's in this document that makes Russia smile. Second thing, this creates a credibility problem for Trump specifically, but also for America generally. This is a bigger issue than just one president. Here's the deal, right? Trump ran on being the guy who could handle Russia. He talked about being unpredictable. He talked about being tough. He said he'd stand up to Putin, but his actual strategy document has Russia saying, yeah, we like this, we're good with this. That's not tough. That's the opposite of tough. And when your allies in Europe, when Ukraine, when all these countries that depend on American security commitments read this, they're going to wonder, can we actually count on America? Can we trust these guys? Can we believe what they're telling us? That's a real problem. You can't have a successful foreign policy if your allies don't trust you. You just can't. Third thing, this is particularly bad right now because of where things stand with Ukraine. Winter's coming. Russia's been pushing hard. Ukraine's been losing ground. They're in a tough spot. This is the moment when Ukraine needs to know that America's firmly in their corner. They need to feel like America's got their back completely. Instead, Trump's strategy is something that Russia's celebrating. That's not the message you want to send if you're trying to discourage Russia from continuing aggression. It's basically the opposite message. It's like saying, yeah, go ahead, do what you want, keep pushing. We're probably going to negotiate anyway, so you might as well take as much as you can get. Now, here's the important part that a lot of people miss. Trump's not secretly working with Russia or anything like that. This isn't some conspiracy thing where everyone's in on it together. What this is Trump and his advisors have a genuinely different view of how America should interact with the world than previous administrations had. That's the real story. Trump thinks that America's been too invested in global commitments. He thinks we've been spending too much money and political capital on places that don't directly affect us. He thinks we should focus more on direct American interests and less on these broader strategic alliances. That's a legitimate political view. Lots of people agree with it. Lots of Americans think, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be spending so much on foreign stuff. Maybe we should focus on problems here at home. But the problem is, when you adopt that view, and when you put it into an actual national security strategy, and when that strategy basically aligns with what your adversaries want, you run into this problem where it looks like you're appeasing those adversaries. You look weak, and weakness invites aggression. That's how geopolitics works. That's how the world actually works. When your adversaries think you're weak, or distracted, or not fully committed to countering them, they test you, they push further, they do more stuff. They see how far they can go. And that's exactly what we're seeing with Russia right now. They're testing us. They're seeing how far they can push. So what comes next? Well, that's where things get really interesting. That's where we need to pay attention. Because this strategy is going to guide actual policy decisions. Trump's administration is going to use this as the framework for deciding how much military aid to send to Ukraine. It's going to guide decisions about NATO and what we do with our commitments there. It's going to guide what we do in Europe. It's going to guide how we talk to Russia. And if the strategy is something that Russia's happy with, then you can probably predict that these decisions are going to lean in a direction that Russia likes. You can predict which way things are going to go. That could mean less aid to Ukraine. It could mean questioning NATO commitments and wondering if they're worth it. It could mean being more open to Russian demands in negotiations. It could mean accepting that Russia gets to have a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. Any or all of those things could happen, depending on how Trump interprets his own strategy and how his advisors push him in one direction or another. And here's the thing that should worry people, and are you kidding me? But it should. This comes right as we're heading into the midterm elections. Midterms are in 2026, which is next year basically. And foreign policy actually matters in midterms more than people think. It matters a lot. If things go bad in Ukraine, if Russia keeps winning, if America looks weak, that affects how people vote. It affects how Congress votes on funding. It affects everything. So the fact that Trump's strategy is apparently setting us up for a weaker posture on Russia, right as we're heading into elections, is bad timing. It's terrible timing. Also, this affects Republican unity, which is another thing that matters a lot. You've got Republicans who really care about confronting Russia. You've got Republicans who think China is the real threat, and we should focus there. You've got Republicans who think Trump's approach to Russia is too soft, and we need to be tougher. And then you've got Trump loyalists who think Trump knows exactly what he's doing, and we should trust him. When Trump's strategy apparently makes Russia happy, it creates tension within the party. It creates questions about whether Trump's actually been the tough guy on Russia that he claimed to be, and that could affect how unified the Republican Party stays. It could create divisions that are hard to fix. But here's what's really at stake, and this is the big picture stuff. This is about America's role in the world. This is about whether America's a reliable ally. This is about whether we can actually deter aggression, or whether we just kind of let it happen and hope it works out. When your national security strategy is something that your adversaries are celebrating, you're basically signaling that you're not a credible threat. You're signaling that your adversaries can push you around, and you're not going to fight back as hard as you could. And in a world where Russia, China, and other countries are all testing American resolve, that's a dangerous signal to send. That's the kind of signal that makes countries think they can get away with more. The thing is, Trump's not wrong that America's foreign policy has some problems. There's definitely stuff to criticize about how previous administrations handled things. Maybe we were too focused on some areas. Maybe we were doing stuff that wasn't in our direct interest. Maybe there's a real case to be made for a different approach to foreign policy. But if your solution is to basically align with what your adversaries want, then you've overcorrected, you've gone too far in the other direction, you've fixed one problem by creating a worse one. So where does this leave us? Well, we're in a situation where Trump's national security strategy is apparently something that Russia's happy with. That's not good. That's not what you want. That's the opposite of what you want. And it's going to shape policy decisions going forward. It's going to affect our relationships with allies. It's going to affect how aggressive Russia feels comfortable being. It's going to affect how strong America looks on the world stage. This is one of those moments where you can see the actual consequences playing out of having a president whose foreign policy views are fundamentally different from what previous administrations have done. And so far, it's not looking good for America. Next time, we're going to dive into what this actually means for the 2026 midterms and why Congress is going to have a real problem with this strategy. Because this situation's about to get way messier than it already is. Trust me on that one. This is just the beginning.